The tech billionaire's wife vanished without a trace, leaving only 3 words that would destroy everything he built. 18 months of silence shattered when her face appeared on every screen in Manhattan's most exclusive gala. The woman he dismissed as plain now controlled his company's fate with a single signature. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by someone who claimed to love you? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. Tonight, we witness the ultimate reversal of power in love and business. But was this calculated revenge, or something far more complex? What happens when the person you underestimated holds your entire future in their hands? Hit that notification bell, because this story will change how you see power, love, and the danger of making someone feel invisible. Let me take you back to where the empire began to crumble. She smiled for the cameras at their 5th anniversary party, knowing it would be the last photo they'd ever take together. The Buckhead mansion glowed with warm light, Atlanta's elite mingling on manicured lawns while servers carried champagne that cost more than most people's rent. Layla Blaine stood beside her husband, her hand resting on his arm like she'd been taught. The perfect tech wife, the grateful rescue project. Layla's been such a help with the branding, Carter told the group of investors, his voice carrying that casual dismissal she'd learned to recognize. She's got a good eye for simple things. The men chuckled. Their wives smiled with practiced sympathy. Layla's grip tightened on her glass, but her expression never changed. 5 years of this had taught her to swallow her words like poison. Tell them about the campaign that saved the Johnson account, she said quietly. Carter's jaw tightened for just a second. Oh, that old thing? Team effort, really? He turned back to the group. Anyway, the real excitement is the AI expansion we're announcing next month. She had designed that campaign, stayed up 3 nights straight perfecting every detail, presented it to the clients herself while Carter played golf. But in his version, she was background noise. The photographer called for another shot. Carter's hand found her waist, pulling her close with practiced affection. To everyone watching, they looked perfect. The self-made billionaire and his beautiful wife, living the American dream in their glass palace. You look stunning tonight, Mrs. Blaine, the photographer said. She cleans up nice, Carter replied before she could speak. Though I keep telling her she needs to eat more. Too thin for my taste. Heat crawled up her neck. Around them, the conversation continued, but she heard it like she was underwater. The casual way he spoke about her body. The easy laughter from people who saw her as decoration. Later, as guests filtered out, she stood in their bedroom removing diamond earrings that felt heavier than chains. In the mirror, she caught Carter watching her from the doorway. Good party, he said, loosening his tie. Henderson seemed impressed with the quarterly projections. Hum. She set the earrings in their velvet box, each movement careful and controlled. You were quiet tonight. Everything okay? She turned to face him. This man she'd married in a courthouse in Austin, when they were both hungry and desperate and building something together. Before his success had transformed her from partner into accessory. I designed the Henderson campaign, Carter. He sighed. That patient sound he made when she was being difficult. Here we go again. I presented it. I saved that account. But somehow, it becomes a team effort when you tell the story. Layla, come on. You helped, sure, but I helped. The words came out sharper than she intended. I created it from nothing. You were ready to lose Henderson until I flew to Chicago and convinced them to stay. Carter sat on the bed, pulling off his shoes with the careless motion of a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. Look, I appreciate what you do, but there's a difference between supporting the business and running it. Supporting, like she was staff. She walked to the closet, hands shaking as she hung up her dress. The black silk had cost $3,000. He'd chosen it, said it made her look appropriate. Remember when we met? She asked without turning around. Of course. You said I was brilliant. Said my ideas were going to change everything. They did. You helped build this company. No. She faced him again. I built it with you. There's a difference. Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it automatically, his attention already shifting. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Big day ahead. She watched him scroll through emails, dismissing her as easily as he'd dismiss a meeting that wasn't worth his time. In that moment, something inside her chest went completely quiet. Carter. He didn't look up. Do you love me? That got his attention. He set the phone down, wearing that careful expression he used in difficult board meetings. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Of course I love you. Why would you even ask that? Because you don't see me. He reached for her, probably planning some gentle reassurance that would make this conversation disappear. But she stepped back. I'm not talking about looking at me, she said. I'm talking about seeing me. Who I am. What I'm capable of. What I've done for you. For us, for this life we built. Layla, you introduce me like I'm lucky to be here. You dismiss my work like it's a hobby. You talk about my body like it belongs to you. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands were fists. When was the last time you asked what I wanted? What I dreamed about? What I needed? Carter stood, and she could see him calculating, trying to find the right words to end this conversation. You're overtired. It's been a long night. That was it. The final dismissal. The gentle pat on the head that said her feelings were just exhaustion, her words just noise. She walked to her dresser, pulling out the suitcase she'd hidden behind winter coats for 3 months. His eyes widened as she set it on the bed. What are you doing? Layla looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd given her everything except the one thing that mattered. Respect. Something I should have done years ago. Have you ever reached that moment where you realize love isn't enough to overcome disrespect? Tell me in the comments what your breaking point would be. As she walked to their bedroom that night, Carter scrolling his phone obliviously on the couch, Layla pulled out a suitcase she'd hidden for months. Tomorrow, the tech world would wake up to headlines, but tonight, she had one final message to leave. The note was simple: watch Paris fashion, but those 3 words would cost him everything he'd built in Silicon Valley. Carter found it propped against the coffee maker at 6 a.m., written in her neat handwriting on their expensive stationery. He read it twice before the meaning sank in. Then he ran upstairs, taking the steps 3 at a time. The walk-in closet looked like a crime scene. Empty hangers swayed from sudden movement. Her jewelry box gaped open, only cheap pieces remaining. The Hermes bags he'd bought her were gone. The Louboutin shoes, the designer dresses that had made her look like she belonged in his world. Layla, he called out, knowing she wouldn't answer. The bathroom counter was bare except for a single tube of mascara and his cologne. She'd taken everything that mattered, left everything he'd chosen for her. Even her toothbrush was gone. His phone rang. Sir, his assistant's voice was carefully neutral. There are some reporters outside the building. They're asking about Mrs. Blaine. Carter's stomach dropped. What about her? They're saying she's missing, that there might be marital problems. He hung up and called Layla's phone, straight to voicemail. The recording was new. You've reached Layla. I'm starting something new. Don't wait for me to call back. Not even using his last name anymore. Over the next few days, the questions started. Where was Mrs. Blaine? Why'd she cleaned out their joint accounts? Was it true she'd been the creative force behind Blaine Tech's most successful campaigns? Carter gave careful answers. Personal matter, working through some issues. She needed space. But privately, he was falling apart. He hired investigators, called her old friends from college, even contacted her mother in Birmingham, who hung up on him after 5 seconds. She told me this day might come, was all her mother would say before the line went dead. The media attention grew. Tech blogs picked up the story. Someone leaked that she'd been seen at the Atlanta airport with multiple suitcases. Another source claimed she'd bought a one-way ticket to Paris. Paris Fashion Week was starting. Carter stared at her note until the words blurred together. Watch Paris fashion. What was he supposed to watch? She'd never shown interest in fashion beyond wearing what he suggested. Had she? He started remembering things differently. The way she'd studied his competitors' marketing campaigns with laser focus. How she'd known exactly which colors would appeal to their target demographic. Her sketches that he'd found scattered around the house. Drawings he'd assumed were just doodling. The nights she'd stayed up working on presentations while he slept. The clients who'd specifically asked to work with her again. The campaigns that had won awards under his name. His business started suffering. Without her quiet corrections, his presentations felt flat. The creative team looked lost without her input. Revenue projections that had seemed solid began to crumble. "Where's Mrs. Blaine?" clients started asking. "We were hoping to work with her again." "She's taking a break," became his standard answer. But the questions multiplied. 2 weeks after she'd left, his biggest client called an emergency meeting. "We need to discuss the Morrison campaign," Henderson said, settling into Carter's conference room chair. "The one Mrs. Blaine developed last year." Carter's chest tightened. "What about it? We want to expand it globally, but we need her involved. Her vision, her execution." Henderson leaned forward. "Between you and me, Carter, that woman has something special. We've tried working with other agencies since then, but nobody captures our brand the way she does. I can handle the expansion myself." Henderson's expression was polite but firm. "No offense, but your wife understands our customers in ways you don't. She gets the emotional connection, the cultural nuances. We need her back on this project, or we'll have to reconsider our partnership." That contract was worth $12 million annually. Losing it would trigger a domino effect with other clients. Carter called Layla's phone again. Still voicemail. Still that message about starting something new. He tried her social media. Her Instagram was gone. Facebook deleted. LinkedIn showed her last activity as 3 weeks ago. She'd erased herself from his world completely. The investigators came back with nothing. She'd used cash for everything after Atlanta. No credit card trail. No hotel bookings under her name. Like she'd planned this disappearance for months. Which Carter was starting to realize she probably had. He found himself going through old emails, looking for clues. Found drafts she'd saved of campaigns that never got produced. Ideas that were too bold, too innovative for his taste. Projects that would have positioned them as industry leaders instead of followers. All signed with her name. All buried in his inbox like they didn't matter. The breaking point came when he discovered her LinkedIn profile was still active under her maiden name. Layla Davis, creative director. Based in Paris, France. She'd been building a new identity while living with him. Creating an escape route while smiling at his dinner parties. The phone call from Paris came on a rainy Thursday morning. His assistant put it through before asking who it was. "Mr. Blaine?" The voice was crisp, French-accented, professional. "This is Marcel Dubois from Lumiere Creative Agency. I believe we need to discuss your wife." Carter's blood turned to ice. "My wife. Former wife, perhaps. Layla Davis has become quite valuable to us. She's developed some remarkable campaigns for our European clients. We'd like to discuss a collaboration with your company." "A collaboration?" "Yes. You see, one of our biggest investors is very interested in the American market. They're looking for a tech company to partner with. Someone with vision." Marcel paused. "Layla speaks very highly of your potential." The word hung in the air like a judgment. "What's the most powerful message you could leave in just 3 words? Drop your answer below." When his assistant handed him the phone with a call from Paris, Carter's blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't Layla's. It was someone he'd never heard of, calling about a business proposal that would either save his company or destroy it. For 18 months, he searched for her like a man possessed, never realizing she was watching him fall apart from 3,000 miles away. Carter's world became divided into 2 parts, before Layla left and after. Before, his company had been unstoppable. After, everything started cracking. The Henderson account was the first to go, then Morrison Industries, then 3 smaller clients who'd specifically requested Mrs. Blaine's creative input. Each lost contract felt like another piece of his foundation crumbling. He hired new creative directors, expensive ones with impressive portfolios and industry connections. They produced work that was technically perfect and completely forgettable. Nothing had the emotional punch that Layla's campaigns had delivered. "It's like we lost our voice," his marketing director said during a particularly brutal quarterly review. "The work feels empty." Carter knew what she meant. Without Layla's insights, their campaigns felt like expensive wallpaper. Pretty to look at, easy to ignore. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Layla was building something extraordinary. She'd rented a small apartment in the Marais district, the kind of place she never could have imagined living in when she was married to Carter. exposed brick walls, vintage furniture from flea markets, windows that opened onto narrow streets where artists and dreamers congregated. The woman who'd once needed permission to redecorate their living room now commanded respect in rooms full of Europe's most creative minds. Mademoiselle Davis, Marcel Dubois had said during their first meeting, "Your portfolio is remarkable, but what interests me most is what you haven't shown me yet." Layla had smiled, pulling out a folder she'd been saving. "You mean the campaigns that never saw daylight?" The work inside was revolutionary. Bold concepts that would have repositioned Blaine Tech as an industry innovator instead of follower. Ideas that Carter had dismissed as too risky or not our brand. Within 6 months, Layla had transformed Lumiere Creative from a mid-tier agency into one of Europe's most sought-after firms. Her campaigns didn't just sell products, they created cultural moments. The Renault commercial that made grown men cry. The Chanel fragrance ad that became a short film. The tech startup launch that looked like art. Every success felt like vindication. Every award was proof of what Carter had thrown away. But late at night, when the adrenaline of achievement wore off, she still dreamed about his hands on her skin. Still woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. Back in Atlanta, Carter was living his own version of hell. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum without her laughter echoing through the halls. He'd catch himself buying 2 coffees, setting 2 plates at breakfast, calling her name when something funny happened on TV. The investigators he'd hired came back with fragments. She'd been seen at gallery openings in Paris. Someone thought they'd spotted her at a fashion show. A business contact mentioned meeting an American woman at a networking event who'd seemed familiar. But no address, no contact information, no way to reach the woman who'd vanished like smoke. His mother called every few weeks, fishing for information. "I always said that girl was too good for you," she'd say with surgical precision. Smart women don't stay where they're not appreciated. Carter wanted to argue, but the evidence was mounting against him. His company was struggling without Layla's creative vision. His personal life was a wasteland. His sleep was haunted by memories of conversations where he dismissed her ideas, her contributions, her worth. The worst part was discovering how much she'd protected him. Bills she'd managed, relationships she'd maintained, problems she'd solved before they reached his desk. He'd thought she was just a supportive wife, but she'd been the invisible engine keeping his life running smoothly. Now everything was chaos. His assistant quit. His cleaning service canceled after he snapped at them for moving Layla's remaining belongings. His favorite restaurant stopped holding their usual table because he'd spent 3 dinners staring at the empty seat across from him. The breaking point came when he found her sketchbook wedged behind their bedroom dresser. Page after page of brilliant concepts, detailed notes, strategic thinking that would have made his competitors weep with envy. All signed LD in her careful handwriting. Layla Davis, not Layla Blaine. She'd been planning her escape longer than he'd realized, building her own identity while he'd assumed she was content being an extension of his success. The final sketch stopped his heart. It was a logo design, elegant, sophisticated, powerful. At the bottom, she'd written, "For when I'm ready to be seen." He tried calling her number again. Still disconnected. Tried her email. Bounced back. Tried sending messages through mutual friends, but none of them had heard from her since she'd left. It was like she'd erased their entire history and started over. Which, Carter was beginning to understand, was exactly what she'd done. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, addressed to him personally. Manhattan Fashion Gala. Black tie, +1 requested. At the bottom, in elegant script, featuring the exclusive debut of Lumiere Creative's latest campaign. His hand shook as he read the RSVP card. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to avoid whatever trap this might be. But the larger part, the part that had been searching for her for 18 months, knew he had no choice. Have you ever completely reinvented yourself after someone underestimated you? What was your transformation story? The invitation to the Manhattan Gala arrived with her new company logo. Simple, elegant, impossible to ignore. Carter stared at the RSVP card, not knowing that accepting would put him face to face with a woman he no longer recognized. The room fell silent when her face filled the screens. Not because she looked different, but because she finally looked like herself. Carter stood in the back of the ballroom, champagne growing warm in his hand as Manhattan's elite gathered for the annual fashion gala. He'd arrived late, hoping to slip in unnoticed. The invitation had been eating at him for weeks, but he couldn't stay away. Lumiere Creative. That name had been haunting his nightmares. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice carried across the crowd. We're proud to present the E. The lights dimmed. Conversation died. 3 massive screens descended from the ceiling, and suddenly the room was filled with music that made Carter's chest tight with recognition. It was the song that had played at their wedding. Billie Holiday's voice, smoky and knowing, singing about love and loss and second chances. Then she appeared. Layla moved across the screen like liquid grace, her hair shorter than he remembered, styled in a way that made her cheekbones look carved from marble. She wore white silk that flowed around her like water, every step deliberate and powerful. But it wasn't the clothes or the styling that made the room gasp. It was her eyes. They burned with confidence that hadn't existed when she lived with him. She looked directly into the camera with the kind of self-possession that made viewers lean forward, desperate to know her secrets. Dior, she said, her voice richer than he remembered, is not about wearing confidence. It's about remembering you had it all along. The camera pulled back to reveal her walking through scenes that told a story. A woman leaving an empty penthouse, flying across an ocean, finding herself in a new city, creating something beautiful from nothing. It wasn't just a fashion ad. It was her autobiography, told in 90 seconds of pure visual poetry. The final shot showed her standing on a Paris rooftop at sunset, the Eiffel Tower glowing behind her as she removed a wedding ring and let it fall into the wind. The tagline appeared in elegant script, Dior, become unforgettable. The screens went black. For a moment, the ballroom was completely silent. Then the applause started. Not polite society clapping, but genuine appreciation for something extraordinary they'd just witnessed. Mon Dieu, someone whispered near Carter. Who is she? That's Layla Davis, another voice answered, the creative director behind the Lumiere campaigns. She's the one everyone's been talking about. Carter felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Davis, her maiden name. She'd erased his identity from her completely. I heard she used to be married to some tech guy in Atlanta. A woman said, her voice carrying that particular tone rich people used when discussing gossip. He never appreciated her talent. She left him and became the most sought-after creative director in Europe. Smart woman. Nothing worse than a man who can't see what he has. Carter wanted to disappear. Wanted to leave before anyone recognized him as the fool who'd let her go. But then the crowd was parting, and she was there. Layla walked into the gala like she owned it. The white dress from the commercial had been replaced by black silk that made her skin glow like burnished gold. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Diamond earrings caught the light as she moved. She looked like a queen. More importantly, she looked happy. Men stepped forward to introduce themselves. Women smiled with genuine warmth instead of the competitive politeness Carter remembered from Atlanta parties. She moved through the crowd with easy confidence, speaking French to some guests, laughing at jokes, accepting compliments with grace. This was not the woman who'd stood silently beside him at company events. This was not the wife who needed his approval to speak to investors. This was someone entirely new. Or maybe, Carter realized with growing horror, this was who she'd always been underneath. When she wasn't being diminished, when she wasn't being dismissed, when she wasn't being made to feel grateful for scraps of recognition. Layla, a man's voice cut through the crowd. French accent, designer suit, the kind of confidence that came from old money and good breeding. Ma chérie, you were magnificent up there. Carter watched as the man approached her, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture of easy familiarity. She turned to him with a smile that Carter recognized from their early days together. Genuine, unguarded, happy. Marcel, she said, her voice warm. Did you see Henderson's face during the screening? I thought he might faint. Henderson, Carter's former client was here, chatting with his ex-wife like old friends. The $12 million account he'd lost because he couldn't provide Mrs. Blaine's creative input was now working directly with her. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. Marcel, tall, sophisticated, the kind of man who probably quoted poetry and knew which fork to use at state dinners, leaned down to whisper something in her ear. She laughed, a sound Carter hadn't heard in years. That's when she saw him. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and for a moment, the noise and movement around them faded to nothing. He saw surprise flicker across her face, followed by something that might have been pain. But then her expression smoothed into polite neutrality. She said something to Marcel, who glanced in Carter's direction with obvious curiosity. Then she was walking toward him, every step measured and deliberate. When she stopped in front of him, Carter could smell her perfume. Something new, something he didn't recognize. "Carter." Her voice was perfectly composed. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Layla." His throat felt raw. "You look incredible." "Thank you." She didn't return the compliment. "How did you find out about tonight?" "I was invited." He pulled out the invitation, his hands shaking slightly. "Lumiere Creative." "That's you." "That's me." "No explanation. No apology." Just simple acknowledgement. They stood there for a moment, the weight of 18 months and 1,000 unspoken words between them. "The campaign," he said finally. "It was brilliant." "I know." The confidence in her voice hit him like a physical blow. The woman he'd married would have deflected the compliment, would have credited the team, would have minimized her own contribution. This woman owned her success completely. "Layla." Marcel appeared at her elbow, his presence protective without being possessive. "Henderson would like to discuss the European expansion. Are you ready?" She nodded, then looked back at Carter. "It was good to see you again." She was already turning away when he found his voice. "Wait, could we talk?" Privately, Layla paused, considering. Around them, the gala continued, but Carter felt like the entire room was watching this conversation. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said finally. "Please, 5 minutes." Marcel's hand found her elbow again, a subtle reminder that she had choices now. People who valued her opinion. A life that didn't revolve around managing someone else's ego. "Perhaps another time," she said, her tone suggesting there would never be another time. As she walked away, Carter heard Henderson's voice carrying across the room. "Layla, darling, that campaign was pure genius. We absolutely must discuss expanding the concept globally." The woman who'd once needed permission to speak at business dinners was now commanding respect from industry leaders. The wife who'd been introduced as helpful with simple things was being courted by Fortune 500 companies. Carter finished his champagne in one burning gulp and headed for the exit. What would you do if you saw your ex succeed beyond your wildest dreams? Be honest in the comments. When Marcel appeared at her side, his hand resting possessively on her waist, Carter felt something break inside his chest. But it was her smile, genuine, radiant, free, that told him everything. She hadn't just survived without him. She had flourished. He came to her hotel, sweet begging for a second chance. She offered him a business contract instead. Carter spent 3 days tracking down which hotel she was staying at. The Carlyle, of course. The kind of place that defined understated luxury, where privacy was more valuable than gold and the staff could spot desperation from across a marble lobby. He tried calling. Her number was still disconnected. He tried reaching out through mutual contacts, but none of their old friends seemed to know how to reach her. Or if they did, they weren't telling him. Finally, he bribed a contact at Lumiere Creative. Just the hotel name, nothing more. Even that it cost him a 5-figure consulting fee he couldn't afford to lose. Now he stood outside her suite, his hand raised to knock, wondering what the hell he was going to say. The woman at the gala had been a stranger wearing his ex-wife's face. Confident, powerful, untouchable. He knocked. The door opened, and there she was. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a white button-down shirt that somehow looked more expensive than the gown she'd worn to his company events. "Carter." She didn't seem surprised to see him. "How did you find me?" "I have my ways." She studied his face for a moment. then stepped aside to let him in. "You look terrible." He did. He'd been living on coffee and bourbon for weeks, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, obsessing over business problems he used to solve with her help. The suite was elegant without being flashy. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, but Layla moved past the view like it didn't matter. On the coffee table, her laptop was open to what looked like a presentation. Legal documents were scattered beside it. "Working?" he asked. "Always." She gestured to the couch. "Sit. You want coffee?" The casual hospitality felt like a knife twist. This was how she treated business associates when they were married. Polite. Professional. Completely impersonal. "Layla, Before you say anything," she interrupted, settling into the chair across from him, like a CEO about to conduct an interview, "you should know that I'm aware of your company's current situation." Carter's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Henderson, Morrison." 3 smaller accounts that specifically requested my input. She counted them off on her fingers. Revenue down 30%. Stock price falling. Your board asking difficult questions about creative direction. "How do you know all this?" She smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Because those clients are working with me now. They reached out after you couldn't deliver what they needed." The casual way she said it made his blood run cold. She wasn't gloating. She was stating facts. "You stole my clients." "I didn't steal anything." Her voice stayed level. "They came to me because you couldn't provide what they were looking for. Well, I used to provide for you." Carter ran his hands through his hair, trying to process what she was telling him. "So, this is revenge? You disappear for 18 months, then systematically destroy my business." Carter, the way she said his name was almost pitying. "Do you really think I've spent a year and a half thinking about you?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. She'd moved on, built something new. While he'd been falling apart, missing her, she'd been thriving without him. "Then why are you telling me this?" Layla leaned forward, her expression shifting into something more businesslike. "Because I have a proposition for you." She reached for a folder on the side table, pulling out documents that looked like they'd been prepared by expensive lawyers. "One of my investors is interested in the American tech market, specifically AI development with strong creative applications." She slid the folder across to him. "They're looking for a company to partner with. Someone with existing infrastructure, but room for improvement in the creative department." Carter opened the folder and nearly choked. The investment amount had more zeros than he'd expected to see in his lifetime. "This is enough to save your company, expand globally, put you back on top of the industry." She paused. "Under certain conditions." Of course there were conditions. He scanned the documents, his lawyer's training from business school kicking in automatically. Partnership terms, creative control clauses, management structure changes. "You want creative oversight of all campaigns." "Complete creative control," she corrected. "All branding, all marketing, all client-facing creative work goes through me and my team." "Your team?" "I'd be bringing 5 people from Millionaire, best in the industry. They'd integrate with your existing staff, but final creative decisions would be mine." Carter kept reading. The terms were generous financially, but brutal professionally. She would essentially be taking over half his company, the half that had been failing since she left. "What about you?" he asked. "You'd move back to Atlanta?" "I'd split my time. Paris and Atlanta. Wherever the work requires me to be." Her tone was completely neutral, like she was discussing shipping logistics instead of potentially rebuilding their lives in the same city. "And us?" The question came out before he could stop it. Layla's expression didn't change. "There is no us, Carter. This is business. I'm offering you a way to save what you built. Whether you take it is up to you." The silence stretched between them. Outside, Manhattan hummed with afternoon traffic, but inside the suite, Carter could hear his own heartbeat. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why offer this? Why not just let my company fail?" For the first time since he'd arrived, something flickered across her face. Not affection, not forgiveness, something more complicated. "Because despite everything, I don't want to see you lose everything you worked for. And because..." She hesitated. "Because the work we did together before things got complicated was good. It could be good again." She stood up, moving to the window with her back to him. But understand this, Carter. I'm not coming back to save you. I'm not coming back to fix your problems or manage your ego or make you feel better about the choices you made. I'm offering a business partnership between equals. Equals. The word hung in the air like a challenge. If you can't handle working with me as an equal partner, if you need to be the only name on the door, if you need credit for work you didn't do. She turned back to face him. Then we don't have anything to discuss. Carter looked down at the contract again. The numbers were staggering. The terms were humbling. And the woman offering him this lifeline was someone he no longer recognized. I need time to think. Of course. Take all the time you need. She moved to the door, a clear dismissal. But Carter, don't take too long. My investor has other options. As he gathered the documents, she placed her hand on the doorknob. One more thing, she said without looking at him. If you sign this contract, you need to understand that I'm not the woman who left you 18 months ago. I'm not going to be grateful for your approval or happy to work in your shadow. I've learned what I'm worth. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Carter alone in the hallway with a decision that would change everything. Is there a difference between forgiveness and justice? What would your terms be if someone came crawling back? Sign it, she said, or watch everything you built crumble. Your choice. But when their fingers brushed over the pen, both felt the spark that once ignited their world. She gave him a lifeline with one hand and pulled the rope tighter with the other, and he was grateful for both. Carter spent 3 sleepless nights reading every word of her contract. The legal language was precise, elegant, and absolutely ruthless. She wanted complete creative control, final approval on all campaigns, and the authority to hire and fire anyone in the creative department. But the money was real. The investor backing was solid, and his company was dying without her vision. He called his lawyer first, then his accountant, then his board members, one by one, explaining the terms without mentioning who was behind the offer. This investor wants significant control, his lawyer warned. Are you prepared to give up that much power? Power he'd already lost the day she walked out. The question was whether he was ready to admit it. The meeting was set for Thursday morning in his conference room. Neutral territory, though nothing about this felt neutral. Layla arrived with her team. 5 people who looked like they'd stepped out of a European fashion magazine. Confident, creative, expensive. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than his assistant's monthly salary. Her hair was pulled back in a style that made her look like she could buy and sell companies before lunch, which Carter was beginning to realize she probably could. Gentlemen, she said, settling into the chair across from him like she'd never left. Thank you for agreeing to meet. His own team looked nervous. They'd heard rumors about Mrs. Blaine's return, but hadn't expected this version of her. Professional, commanding, completely in control. Before we begin, Carter said, trying to establish some authority, I want to understand the creative oversight clause. Layla smiled. The expression was polite, but sharp enough to cut glass. Which part needs clarification? All campaigns go through you for final approval. That's correct. Even internal communications, employee newsletters, website updates, anything that represents the company's brand voice, yes. She opened her tablet, scrolling to what looked like a detailed analysis. Your current materials lack consistency. The tone shifts depending on who's writing. The visual identity is scattered. Your social media presence is amateur at best. Each criticism landed like a physical blow because he knew she was right. Since she'd left, their marketing had felt disconnected, like different companies were handling different pieces. We have a creative team, his marketing director said defensively. You have people with job titles, Layla corrected, but no unified vision, no strategic thinking, no understanding of what makes your audience care about your product instead of just tolerating it. She clicked to the next slide, and suddenly the room was looking at a complete rebrand proposal. New logos, new color schemes, new messaging that made their AI technology sound like magic instead of math. This is what we'd implement in the first 90 days, she continued. Complete brand overhaul. Every touch point redesigned. Every message refined. Carter stared at the presentation, his throat tight with recognition. This was the work he'd watched her create late at night when they were married. The brilliant concepts he dismissed as too ambitious or not quite right for our market. She'd taken those rejected ideas and made them better. The financial projections, his CFO said, studying the documents. You're estimating a 40% increase in client retention. Conservative estimate, one of her team members said in a crisp British accent. We've seen similar results with 3 comparable companies in Europe. They'd done their homework, researched his competitors, analyzed his market position, identified exactly where his company was vulnerable and how to fix it. The presentation continued for 2 hours. Each slide revealed another layer of strategic thinking that made his current approach look like amateur hour. By the time she finished, his own team was leaning forward, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation. They were sold before the meeting was half over. Questions? Layla asked, closing her tablet. Just one, Carter said. Why us? With your track record, you could partner with any company in Silicon Valley. Why come back here? For the first time all morning, her professional mask slipped slightly. Something personal flickered across her face before she composed herself. Because I know what this company is capable of, she said finally. I helped build it once. I can do it again. The room fell silent. His team exchanged glances, suddenly understanding that this wasn't just a business deal. This was personal history playing out in corporate terms. We'll need a few days to review the terms, Carter said. Of course. She stood, her team following suit. But Carter, don't take too long. My investor has other opportunities in this market. As she gathered her materials, their hands brushed, reaching for the same document. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds, but Carter felt electricity shoot up his arm like he'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw a flash of the woman he'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, still affected by his touch. Then she pulled her hand away, and the moment was gone. My assistant will send you the revised contract language, she said, back to being all business. We've addressed the intellectual property concerns your lawyer raised. After they left, Carter sat alone in the conference room, staring at the presentation materials she'd left behind. Each page was branded with the Lumiere creative logo, but underneath, in tiny print, was something that made his chest tight. Strategic Consulting by L. Davis, Creative Director. Not L. Blaine. She'd erased his name from her professional identity completely. His marketing director poked her head back into the room. Boss, what do you think? Carter looked up from the papers, his decision already made. Call the lawyer. Tell him we're signing. Really? Really? He stood, straightening his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. And clear my schedule for next week. I have a feeling things are about to get very interesting around here. Can you separate personal feelings from professional collaboration? How do you work with someone who hurt you? When she stayed past midnight to finish the presentation, he brought coffee, her order memorized from their marriage. You remembered, she whispered, and for a moment, her walls cracked. But morning would bring Marcel's arrival from Paris, and with him, a proposal that would change everything. Working with her was torture. Every meeting a reminder of what he'd thrown away. Every success a testament to what he'd failed to see. The first day of their partnership, Layla arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. Carter watched from his office window as she stepped out of a black Tesla, looking like she owned the building, which in a way she now did. Her team had taken over the entire creative floor. Gone were the beige cubicles and motivational posters. In their place stood clean white desks, mood boards covered in fabric samples and color palettes, and equipment that looked like it belonged in a NASA control room. She's completely reorganized everything, his assistant whispered during his morning coffee run. And everyone's terrified of her. Terrified? Well, not terrified exactly. More like desperate to impress her. Jake for graphics has redone his presentation 4 times. Sarah from social media actually bought new clothes. Carter could understand that. Layla had always had a way of making people want to rise to her level. When they were married, he'd assumed it was because she was his wife. Now he realized it was just her. The morning staff meeting was a revelation. Layla sat at the head of the conference table like she'd been born for the role, reviewing campaign proposals with the kind of attention to detail that made grown professionals sweat. "The Morrison pitch," she said, pulling up designs on the main screen. "Good concept, weak execution. The emotional connection isn't there. We focused on the technical specifications like they requested," the lead designer said. "They requested specifications because they didn't trust you to understand their real needs." Layla clicked to the next slide. Morrison Industries makes safety equipment for construction workers. Their customers aren't buying specs. They're buying the promise that their employees come home alive every night. The room went dead quiet. Carter had been trying to win back the Morrison account for 6 months, focusing on product features and competitive pricing. In 30 seconds, Layla had identified the emotional core he'd completely missed. "The tagline should be every worker, every day, every time," she continued. "The visuals should show real families, real job sites, real people whose lives depend on this equipment working perfectly." She was brilliant. Carter had forgotten how brilliant. Over the next few weeks, he watched her transform his company from the inside out. Campaigns that had been struggling suddenly found their voice. Clients who'd been on the fence started signing contracts. The office energy shifted from desperate survival to genuine excitement. And she did it all without acknowledging their personal history even once. In meetings, she called him Mr. Blaine. When they passed in hallways, she nodded politely like he was a colleague she barely knew. When other employees made casual references to their marriage, she redirected the conversation to work with surgical precision. It was like she'd erased 5 years of history and replaced it with professional courtesy. The worst part was how good they were together professionally. Their creative instincts still clicked perfectly. When he suggested technical improvements, she found ways to make them emotionally compelling. When she proposed bold creative risks, he figured out how to make them financially viable. They were building something extraordinary, and it was killing him. "You need to stop staring at her," his assistant said one afternoon, catching him watching Layla through his office window as she reviewed storyboards with her team. "I'm not staring. You're staring. And it's weird. She's your business partner now, not your wife." Ex-wife. The divorce papers had been finalized while she was in Paris, handled by lawyers who'd made sure they never had to see each other. Clean, efficient, and completely final. But working with her felt like being slowly tortured by the ghost of what they'd once had. Late Thursday evening, Carter was leaving the office when he noticed lights still on in the creative department. Layla sat alone at her desk, surrounded by printouts and coffee cups, working on what looked like the Henderson presentation. She'd been putting in 12-hour days since she'd arrived, pushing herself and her team to deliver results that would justify her investors' confidence. The dedication was familiar. She'd worked the same way when they were building the company together, back when success mattered more than sleep. He knocked on her office door. She looked up, surprised to see him still in the building. "Working late?" he asked. "Henderson wants to see 3 different approaches tomorrow morning." She rubbed her eyes, smudging her makeup slightly. "I want to make sure we nail this. We used to stay up all night working on pitches like this." The comment slipped out before he could stop it. Personal, nostalgic, exactly the kind of thing she'd been avoiding since she arrived. Layla's expression tightened. "That was a long time ago, right? Saw the..." He started to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, the Henderson work looks incredible. They'd be crazy not to love it. "Thank you." He was almost at the elevator when she called his name. "Carter." He turned around. She was standing in her doorway, silhouetted against the office lights, looking suddenly uncertain. "Do you want coffee?" I was about to make some. It was such a simple question, but loaded with implications. Coffee meant staying. Staying meant talking. Talking meant crossing the professional boundaries she'd worked so hard to establish. "I know your order," he said. "Double shot, oat milk, extra hot." Something flickered across her face. Surprise that he remembered, maybe, or pain that he still cared enough to remember. "You don't have to. I want to." The coffee shop in the lobby was closed, but there was a machine on their floor that made decent espresso if you knew how to work it. Carter had learned during late-night sessions when they were first building the company, back when good coffee felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. When he returned with 2 cups, Layla had cleared space at her desk for him to sit. The gesture felt significant, like she was letting him back into her world in a small way. "Henderson's going to love the family angle," he said, reviewing her storyboards. "Especially the piece about legacy construction companies." "Think so?" She sounded genuinely uncertain, which surprised him. The confident woman who'd commanded his conference room was showing cracks in her armor. "I know so. This is exactly what they need to differentiate from their competitors." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, making small adjustments to the presentation. It felt like old times when they'd been partners in every sense of the word. "Carter," she said as he was packing up to leave. "Thank you. For the coffee. For the help. Anytime." She smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd given him since she'd returned. It lit up her face and made his chest tight with memory. "We make a good team," she said softly. "We always did." The moment stretched between them, loaded with everything they weren't saying. Then her phone buzzed with a text message, breaking the spell. She glanced at the screen, and her expression changed, became guarded again. "Marcel's flight lands at 10 tomorrow, she said, not looking at him. "He's coming to see how the integration is going." Marcel, the sophisticated Frenchman who'd supported her career, believed in her vision, treated her like an equal from day one. The man who'd never made her feel invisible. "That's good," Carter managed. "I'm sure he'll be impressed with what you've accomplished here." Layla nodded, already gathering her things. The moment of connection was over, replaced by the professional distance she maintained so carefully. As Carter rode the elevator down to the parking garage, he tried not to think about the way her face had softened when she'd mentioned Marcel's name. Tried not to imagine her greeting him at the airport, falling into his arms with the kind of genuine happiness she'd never shown with Carter. But some thoughts were impossible to avoid. How do you work with someone who hurt you? When she stayed past midnight to finish the presentation, he brought coffee, her order memorized from their marriage. "You remembered," she whispered, and for a moment, her walls cracked. But morning would bring Marcel's arrival from Paris, and with him, a proposal that would change everything. Marcel arrived like a prince from a fairy tale. Except in this story, the princess had already saved herself. Carter watched from his office window as the sleek Mercedes pulled up to their building. The man who stepped out looked exactly like he'd expected. Tall, elegant, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. The kind of European sophistication that made American wealth look loud and obvious. Marcel Dubois moved through the lobby like he owned it, stopping to chat with the receptionist in flawless English touched with just enough accent to be charming. Carter could see women's heads turning as he passed, drawn to the effortless confidence that came from generations of good breeding. This was the man who'd seen Layla's worth when her own husband had been blind to it. "He's here," his assistant announced unnecessarily. "Send them to conference room A when they're ready." Carter straightened his tie, hating that he felt like he was competing for something. This was supposed to be a business meeting. Marcel was the investor. Carter was the CEO. Layla was their creative director. Simple, professional, completely impersonal. The door opened, and Layla walked in with Marcel's hand resting lightly on her lower back. The gesture was casual, protective, intimate in a way that made Carter's jaw clench. "Carter," Layla said, her voice carefully neutral, "I'd like you to meet Marcel Dubois." Marcel extended his hand with a smile that was probably genuine. "Mr. Blaine, I've heard so much about you." The handshake was firm, confident, lasting just long enough to establish dominance without being obvious about it. Carter had done business with enough Europeans to recognize the subtle power play. "Welcome to Atlanta," Carter said. "I hope you'll find our operation meets your expectations." "I'm sure it will." Marcel's eyes swept the conference room, taking in the upgraded decor, the new technology, the creative energy that hummed through the building since Layla's return. "Layla has told me wonderful things about the potential here." They settled into the presentation, reviewing quarterly projections, client retention rates, and expansion opportunities. Marcel asked intelligent questions, offered strategic insights, and generally behaved like the sophisticated investor he was. But Carter couldn't stop watching the way he looked at Layla. There was appreciation in Marcel's eyes, but not the hungry kind Carter remembered from his own early days with her. This was deeper, more secure, the look of a man who knew exactly what he had and never doubted his right to have it. When Layla presented the Henderson campaign, Marcel's face lit up with genuine pride. Not surprise, pride. Like he'd expected brilliance and was pleased to see it delivered. "Magnificent," he said when she finished. "This is exactly why I knew you belonged in Paris. Your vision was always too large for." He glanced around the room diplomatically. "For smaller markets." The criticism was delivered so smoothly, it took Carter a moment to register the insult. Marcel had just suggested that Atlanta, that Carter's entire company, wasn't worthy of Layla's talents. "We're grateful to have her back," Carter said tightly. "Are you?" Marcel's smile was polite but sharp. "Because from what I understand, you let her go quite easily the first time." The room went silent. Layla's expression was carefully blank, but Carter could see tension in the set of her shoulders. "Marcel," she said quietly, "perhaps we should focus on the current partnership." "Of course, ma chérie." Marcel's tone softened immediately when he spoke to her. "You're absolutely right. The past is past, but the damage was done. The elephant in the room had been acknowledged, and now everyone was thinking about the marriage that had ended badly, the divorce that had been finalized in lawyers' offices, the woman who disappeared to Paris and become someone else entirely. The meeting continued for another hour, covering implementation timelines and resource allocation. Marcel asked detailed questions about market penetration and competitive positioning. He was clearly brilliant, obviously successful, and completely devoted to Layla's career. Everything Carter should have been and hadn't known how to be. "I'd like to see the creative department," Marcel said as they wrapped up. "Meet the team Layla's been raving about." They took a tour through the offices, Marcel charming everyone he met with the kind of effortless social grace that made people feel special. Carter watched his employees respond to the attention, blooming under Marcel's interest in their work. "Your team is impressive," Marcel told Carter as they finished the tour. "Very talented, very dedicated. Layla has chosen well." Chosen well, like she was the one making personnel decisions, which Carter realized she essentially was. In the elevator heading back to the executive floor, Marcel stood slightly behind Layla, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. They spoke in rapid French about something that made her laugh, a sound Carter hadn't heard directed at him since she'd returned. "Dinner tonight?" Marcel asked as they reached Carter's office. "I found a lovely French place in Midtown." "That sounds perfect," Layla said. "Carter, you're welcome to join us if you'd like." The invitation was polite, obligatory, and completely insincere. Marcel's expression made it clear he'd prefer Carter decline, and Layla's tone suggested she expected him to. "I have other plans," Carter lied. "But thank you. Another time, perhaps," Marcel said, though his tone suggested there would never be another time. Carter watched from his window as they left the building together. Marcel opened a car door for her, his hand finding the small of her back again as she slipped into the passenger seat. Through the windshield, Carter could see them talking, Layla's face animated in a way that made her look years younger. This was how she looked when she was truly happy. Relaxed, appreciated, the way she'd looked with Carter once, before he'd started taking her for granted. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but he recognized the writing style immediately. "Thank you for being professional today. I know that wasn't easy." Elle. He stared at the message for a long time, wondering what she meant. Was she referring to Marcel's obvious disapproval? The way her entire demeanor changed when she was with the Frenchman? The fact that she'd moved on so completely while Carter was still stuck in the past? All of the above, probably. Carter typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple: "You deserve to be happy." Her reply came back immediately, "I know." 2 words that said everything. She knew she deserved happiness. She'd found it with Marcel, and Carter's opinion on the matter was completely irrelevant. He was still staring at his phone when his assistant knocked on his door. "Sir, Ms. Davis, left some documents for you to review." She said they're time sensitive. The folders contained expansion proposals, budget projections, and strategic plans that would take their partnership global. Brilliant work that would make them both wealthy beyond imagination. All of it signed L. Davis in her careful handwriting. She'd erased his name from her identity so completely that even their shared business ventures bore only her signature. What hurts more, seeing your ex happy with someone else, or realizing they deserve better than you gave them? When Marcel kissed her goodbye in the lobby, Carter saw her melt into him the way she once did for him. But later, cleaning out old files, he found her journal, and the first entry stopped his heart. Day 1847. I still dream about his hands. She kept a journal for 5 years, documenting every slight, every dismissal, and every moment she still loved him despite it all. Carter found the journal by accident. He'd been cleaning out old storage boxes in his office, looking for financial records his accountant needed, when his hand closed around a familiar leather-bound notebook wedged between quarterly reports. Layla's handwriting, her personal journal from their marriage. You should have put it back. Should have, R. Day 1. Carter said my presentation was cute today, in front of the whole board, like I was a child showing him a drawing instead of a professional proposing $1 million campaign. His hands shook as he turned the page. Day 15. Asked him if he wanted to grab lunch and discuss the Morrison account. He said he was too busy for social calls, but spent an hour on the phone with Jim about golf. I ate alone at my desk again. Day 34. We had sex last night. First time in 2 weeks. He was gentle, considerate, technically perfect, but I felt like a stranger in my own body. Like he was making love to the idea of a wife, not to me. Carter's chest felt tight. He remembered that night. Had thought it was good. Had rolled over afterward feeling satisfied, never noticing that she'd stared at the ceiling until dawn. Page after page revealed the marriage from her perspective. Every casual dismissal he'd forgotten, she'd recorded. Every moment he'd made her feel small, she'd documented. Every time he'd taken credit for her work, she'd noted with careful precision. But worse than the catalog of his failures was something else. Evidence of how much she'd loved him despite everything. Day 156. He brought me coffee this morning without being asked. French roast with oat milk, exactly how I like it. Such a small thing, but it made me cry in the bathroom afterward. I miss being seen by him. I miss feeling like I matter. Day 203. Caught him watching me while I worked on the Henderson pitch. The old look was there for just a moment, like he was proud of me, not just grateful for my help. I would do anything to see that look again. Day 267. He told his mother I was the best thing that ever happened to him. She probably thinks he was just being polite, but I know Carter. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean. Maybe there's still hope for us. Hope. She'd held on to hope for over a year while he'd slowly killed her confidence with 1,000 tiny cuts. Day 445. Found myself designing logos for companies that don't exist. Dream clients, dream campaigns, dreams where someone sees my work and says brilliant instead of helpful. Dreams where I matter. Day 623. He introduced me as my wife, Layla, at the investor dinner. Not my wife who designed our most successful campaign, or my wife who saved the Henderson account. Just my wife. Like that's all I am. Like that's all I'll ever be. Carter had to stop reading. His office felt too small, the walls closing in as he confronted the reality of what he'd done to her. Not through dramatic fights or obvious cruelty, but through casual dismissal. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. But he couldn't stop. The journal was like a car accident, horrifying and impossible to look away from. Day 891. We went to Sarah's wedding today. Watch her marry someone who looks at her like she hung the moon. Carter used to look at me that way. Before success. Before I became part of the furniture. I want to be looked at like that again, but I'm starting to think it won't be by him. Day 1203. He fell asleep during my presentation of the quarterly creative review. Actually dozed off while I was talking about the campaigns that save his company 15% in client retention. I finished presenting to an empty room because I didn't know what else to do. Day 1456. Saw a woman at Starbucks working alone on what looked like architectural plans. She was completely absorbed, passionate, alive with purpose. I realized I haven't felt that way about anything in years. Not since Carter started treating my ideas like hobbies instead of contributions. The entries near the end were different. Less hurt, more resolved. Like she was documenting evidence for a decision she'd already made. Day 1789. He corrected me in front of the Morrison clients today. Said I was overselling the emotional angle when that emotional angle is exactly why they signed with us. Later, in private, he said he was just trying to help me sound more professional. I think he actually believes that. Day 1823. Looked at apartments in Paris online. Just curious. Just wondering what it would feel like to live somewhere nobody knew me as Carter's wife. Somewhere I could just be Layla. Day 1847. I still dream about his hands. The way he used to touch me when we were building something together. Before I became invisible. Before love became habit. I dream about the man who saw potential in me. Not the man who sees only problems to solve. The final entry was dated the morning she'd left. Day 1856. I'm done being invisible. Done apologizing for taking up space. Done pretending that being grateful is the same as being happy. I don't know what comes next, but I know it can't be worse than disappearing a little more each day. If he wants to find me, he'll know where to look. But I'm not holding my breath. Carter closed the journal with hands that shook. She'd left him a roadmap of their marriage's collapse, documented every moment he'd failed her, recorded every hope he'd disappointed. But she'd also left evidence of something else. Love that had survived longer than it should have. Dreams that had kept her going even when he'd stopped seeing her clearly. The knock on his door made him jump. Come in. Layla stepped into his office, professional and composed as always. I need the Henderson file. She stopped, her eyes focusing on the journal in his hands. Her face went white. Those weren't meant for you, she whispered. I found it by accident, in the storage boxes. He held it out to her, but she didn't take it. Layla, I had no idea. No idea what? That your wife was miserable? That you made me feel worthless? Her voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath. Of course you had no idea. You never looked long enough to notice. I am sorry. For reading my private thoughts, or for the 5 years of reasons I had to write them down? Both. Neither. He didn't know how to apologize for something so fundamental, so systemic. I loved you, he said helplessly. I still love you. Layla laughed, but there was no humor in it. You love the idea of me, the supportive wife, the grateful rescue project, the woman who made you feel good about yourself without demanding too much in return. She finally took the journal from his hands, holding it against her chest like armor. But you never loved me, she continued, because you never saw me clearly enough to know who I actually was. If someone read your private thoughts about them, what would they discover? The power of hidden truths? The final entry was dated the morning she left. He will never see me, but maybe someday I'll see myself. When she walked into his office and found him holding her journal, her face went white. Those weren't meant for you, she whispered. Nothing I ever felt was meant for you. Some apologies are too little, too late, but some truths are worth telling anyway. Carter stared at her across the conference room, her journal still open in his hands. The pages felt heavy, each word a weight he'd carried without knowing it. 5 years of her thoughts, her pain, her hope that kept breaking and mending itself like a bone that wouldn't heal right. You documented everything, he said quietly. I had to. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. They trembled slightly as she reached for the journal. I thought I was going crazy. Thought maybe I was being too sensitive, too demanding. You weren't. The words hung between them like smoke. Outside, Atlanta's skyline stretched endlessly, glass and steel monuments to ambition. But here, in this room, everything felt fragile. Have you ever faced someone whose pain you caused, knowing no apology could undo the damage? That's where Carter sat now, drowning in the weight of his own actions. I need you to know something, he continued, closing the journal gently. When I met you in Austin, you were the smartest person in that room. Smarter than me, smarter than everyone. And that scared the hell out of me. Layla's eyes flashed. So you decided to make me feel small? I decided to protect myself. The admission came out raw. My whole life, everything came easy. School, money, business. Then you walked in with your presentation about brand identity, and I knew you could build something I never could. So instead of celebrating that, I tried to dim your light. She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was seeing him for the first time. Why now? Why tell me this now? Because I've spent 18 months watching you become everything I always knew you could be. And I finally understand what I threw away. The numbers don't lie. His company was bleeding money, investors pulling out, employees jumping ship. But that wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was the memory of her laugh, the way she used to light up when she had an idea, the feeling of her body against his when she still trusted him enough to be vulnerable. Carter. Her voice was softer now, but still guarded. You hurt me in ways you can't fix with words. I know. You made me doubt myself, my worth, my intelligence. For years. I know. And now you want me to what? Forget all of that because you've had an awakening. He shook his head. I want you to know that every cruel thing I said was a lie. I told myself to feel better about my own insecurities. You were never plain, never boring, never second best. You were magnificent, and I was too much of a coward to admit it. The rain started then, drops hitting the windows like tears the sky couldn't hold anymore. Layla walked to the glass, her reflection ghost-like against the storm clouds. Do you know what the worst part was? She asked without turning around. Tell me. It wasn't the comments at parties or the way you'd correct me in front of your friends. It was the way you'd touch me afterward, like nothing happened. Like you could tear me down in public and rebuild me in private with your hands. Carter felt something crack inside his chest. Layla, no, let me finish. She turned to face him, tears streaming, but her voice steady. You used our bedroom like a reset button, like good sex could erase bad behavior. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He had done exactly that. Used intimacy as a weapon, as a way to keep her off balance, confused about whether he loved her or merely owned her. What happens when you realize you've been the villain in someone else's love story? Carter was learning that lesson in real time. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said finally. I'm not even asking for another chance. I just need you to know that losing you is the best thing that ever happened to me. Her eyebrows shot up. Excuse me. It forced me to see who I really was. And I hated what I found. He stood up, moving closer but keeping distance between them. You deserved better than I gave you. You deserved better than I was capable of being back then. And now I'm trying to become the man you should have had from the beginning. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of rain and the weight of 5 years' worth of damage. Layla wiped her cheeks, smearing mascara slightly. You can't just decide to be different, Carter. People don't change overnight. You did. I didn't change. I just stopped hiding. The distinction hit him hard. She was right. He had spent years trying to change her, to make her smaller, more manageable. But she had been herself all along, just buried under his expectations and casual cruelties. I was threatened by you, he admitted. By your talent, your strength, your ability to see solutions I couldn't. Instead of being proud to be with someone that amazing, I tried to convince you that you weren't. Can you imagine carrying that kind of guilt? Knowing you spent years convincing the person you love that they weren't worth loving? The company's going under, he said suddenly. She nodded. I know. The industry talks. The contract you offered, it's not just about saving my business, is it? No. It's about proving to yourself that you're strong enough to work with me without losing who you've become. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her since Paris. Maybe you did learn something. Maybe I did. When she walked toward the door, he didn't try to stop her, but she paused at the threshold, looking back. Carter, yeah. Thank you for finally telling me the truth. After she left, he sat alone with her journal, reading every entry he'd missed the first time. By the last page, he understood something that changed everything. She hadn't just been documenting his failures. She'd been documenting her own strength. They promised themselves it was just one night. One moment of weakness in a hotel room where the past collided with possibility. The Miami conference was supposed to be business only. 3 days, separate rooms, professional distance. That lasted exactly 18 hours. Carter knocked on her door at midnight, still in his suit from the client dinner. She opened it in silk pajamas the color of champagne, her hair loose around her shoulders like liquid gold. "We shouldn't," she said, but stepped aside to let him in. "I know." The hotel suite overlooked the ocean, waves crashing against the shore in an endless rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. She moved to the window, putting space between them, but he could feel the electricity crackling across the room. Have you ever been in a moment where you knew you were about to cross a line that would change everything? That's where they stood, on the edge of something that could heal them or destroy them completely. "Marcel called earlier," she said without turning around. "What did he say?" "That he's flying in tomorrow. He wants to take me to dinner. Talk about making our arrangement permanent." Carter's hands clenched at his sides. "Permanent how? Marriage? Partnership? A life in Paris where no one knows my history? Is that what you want?" She finally turned to look at him, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "I want to stop feeling like I'm holding my breath, waiting for someone to hurt me again. I would never. You did. For 5 years, you did." The accusation hung between them like a wall. But then she took a step toward him, and another, until she was close enough to touch. "Why are you here, Carter?" "Because I can't sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I see you in that gala, looking like you were born to be there. Because Marcel touches you like he owns you, and I know what that feels like from the inside." Her laugh was bitter. "You think he's like you?" "No, I think he's everything I should have been." The admission seemed to break something loose in her. She reached up, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw like she was memorizing it. "He sees me," she whispered. "Really sees me. So do I. Now." Too late. Instead of answering, he caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart was hammering like it might break free. "Feel that? That's what happens every time you look at me. It's what happened in Austin when you walked into that conference room. It's what happened on our wedding day, and every day after, even when I was too stupid to show it. What happens when 5 years of denied desire finally breaks free?" They were about to find out. She kissed him first, standing on her toes to reach his mouth, her lips soft and demanding against his. He responded like a man dying of thirst finally finding water, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. "This is crazy," she breathed against his mouth. "I know. We're going to regret this. I know." But she was already unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers sliding across his chest with the familiarity of a woman who had once known every inch of his body. He groaned, low and desperate, as she pushed the fabric off his shoulders. "I missed you," he said, his voice rough with need. "God, Layla, I missed you so much." "Don't talk." Her hands were at his belt now, quick and sure. "Don't make this about feelings." But it was about feelings. It was about 5 years of marriage and 18 months of absence, and the way she used to curl against him after making love, her head on his chest, her breathing slowly sinking with his. He lifted her onto the bed, his mouth finding the hollow of her throat, that spot that always made her arch against him. She still tasted the same, like honey and home and everything he'd lost. Carter. His name was a whisper, a prayer, a question all at once. "I'm here." He kissed his way down her body, relearning every curve, every sensitive spot that made her gasp. "I'm right here." When he finally moved over her, she looked up at him with eyes full of tears and want, and something that might have been hope. "Don't hurt me again," she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "Never." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "I swear to you, never again." They moved together like they were remembering a dance they'd once known by heart. Slow at first, cautious, then with growing urgency as muscle memory took over. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper, and he had to bite back the words he wanted to say. That he loved her, that he'd never stopped, that she was everything good in his world. Afterward, they lay tangled in hotel sheets, her head on his shoulder, both of them breathing hard. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and terrifying at the same time. "This doesn't fix anything," she said eventually. "I know. We can't go back to how we were." "I wouldn't want to." She lifted her head to look at him. "Then what do we do?" Before he could answer, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message lit up the screen, landing at 8 a.m. "Can't wait to see you. Marcel." The spell broke. Layla sat up, pulling the sheet around herself like armor. "He's coming early," she said, voice flat. Carter felt the familiar jealousy rising, but this time it was different. This time it came with understanding. "You have to choose," he said quietly. "I know, and if you choose him, I'll understand." She looked at him with surprise. "You will. He's good to you. He sees your worth. He's everything I should have been from the beginning. But I'm here now, and I love you. And if you give me another chance, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice." The words hung in the air between them as dawn crept through the hotel windows. In a few hours, Marcel would arrive, and she would have to decide: safe love or complicated love, the man who had never hurt her or the man who was learning how not to. What would you choose? Tell me in the comments. Second chances or fresh starts? She had to choose between the man who saw her worth and the man who finally learned to see it. The airport arrivals gate buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers and reunions. Layla stood near the windows, watching planes taxi across the tarmac, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcel's flight had landed 20 minutes ago. She'd left Carter's hotel room at dawn, slipping out while he slept, but not before pressing one last kiss to his forehead. He'd stirred, mumbling her name, and she'd almost crawled back into bed. Almost. Instead, she'd gone to her own room, showered until her skin was raw, and tried to wash away the memory of his hands. It didn't work. Nothing could erase the way he'd looked at her, like she was precious, like she was home. "Layla." Marcel's voice cut through the crowd like warm honey. She turned to see him striding toward her, all French elegance and genuine smile, his arms already reaching for her. When? Everything she'd never felt with Carter. Until last night. "You look tired," Marcel said, studying her face with the careful attention he gave everything about her. "The conference was difficult," something like that. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together as they walked toward baggage claim. His touch was gentle, respectful, everything Carter's had never been in their marriage. But it didn't set her on fire the way Carter's did now. What happens when your heart wants one thing and your head demands another? When safety feels like settling and passion feels like poison? "I have something to ask you," Marcel said as they waited for his luggage. Something important. Layla's stomach dropped. She knew what was coming, could see it in the nervous energy he was trying to hide, in the way his free hand kept touching his jacket pocket. "Marcel, let me say this first, please." He turned to face her fully, his hands finding hers. "These months in Paris, working together, building something beautiful, it has been the happiest time of my life." People swirled around them, but Layla felt frozen in place. This was Marcel, kind, successful, emotionally available Marcel who had never once made her feel small or questioned her intelligence or used sex as a weapon. "You are extraordinary," he continued. "Not just your talent, though that takes my breath away, but your strength, your grace, the way you rebuilt yourself after he broke you." The words hit like a slap. After he broke you. Is that how Marcel saw her? As something that needed fixing? "I'm not broken," she said quietly. "No, of course not. You didn't mean it. You see me as this wounded bird you rescued from her terrible marriage." Marcel's face flushed. "Layla, that's not. Isn't it?" She pulled her hands free. "You fell in love with my story, Marcel. The poor American girl who escaped her cruel husband and found herself in Paris. But what happens when the novelty wears off? That's not fair." Maybe it wasn't. Marcel had been nothing but supportive, patient, understanding. He'd given her space to heal, encouraged her creativity, celebrated her successes. He was everything any reasonable woman would want. So why did her heart belong to the man who'd spent 5 years teaching her to doubt herself? "I can't marry you," she said suddenly. The words came out before she'd consciously made the decision. But the moment she said them, she knew they were true. Marcel's face went pale. "Is it him? Carter?" There was no point in lying. "Yes. He doesn't deserve you. You're right. He doesn't." "Then why? How do you explain to someone that love doesn't follow logic? That sometimes the person who hurts you most is also the person who knows you best. Because when he looks at me now, he sees all of me. The good and the bad, the strong and the weak. He's seen me at my worst and still chooses to fight for me. I would fight for you too. No, you wouldn't. You'd protect me, shelter me, keep me safe. But you've never seen me angry or petty or falling apart. You fell in love with the version of me I became after I left him. Marcel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words. When he spoke, his voice was thick with hurt. You're going back to him. I don't know. Maybe. But I can't move forward with you while I'm still looking backward. And if he hurts you again, then I'll leave again. But this time, I'll leave because I choose to, not because I'm running away. The difference mattered. It was the difference between fear and courage, between reacting and choosing. Marcel pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small velvet box that made Layla's chest tighten with guilt. He looked at it for a moment, then slipped it back inside. I hope you know what you're doing, he said softly. I don't. But for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what I think I should want. He nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. And what you want is him. What I want is to stop being afraid of being hurt, to stop letting fear make my decisions for me. Marcel leaned forward and kissed her cheek, gentle and final. Then go to him, ma chérie. And this time, don't let him forget your worth. As she watched him disappear into the crowd, Layla felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. She just walked away from everything safe and sensible, from a man who would have cherished her without ever causing her pain. But some kinds of love require risk. Some kinds of love are worth the possibility of getting hurt again. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carter. Whatever you decide, I understand. But know that I love you. All of you. Always have. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and typed back. We need to talk. Time to find out if second chances could be built on anything stronger than regret and good intentions. What would you risk for love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. She came back not to be his wife again, but to build something neither of them could create alone. The new office space Carter had leased was a blank canvas. Empty walls, polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta's skyline. When Layla walked in, her heels echoing in the vast space, she felt possibility humming in the air like electricity. What do you think? Carter asked, hovering near the entrance like he was afraid to get too close. It's empty. That's the point. Clean slate. No history, no baggage. Just space for whatever we build together. Together. The words still felt strange between them, fragile as spun glass. 3 weeks had passed since she'd chosen to come back. 3 weeks of careful conversations, therapy sessions, and ground rules that felt like treaty negotiations. They were rebuilding from scratch, learning to be partners before they could even think about being lovers again. Have you ever tried to rebuild trust with someone who's seen you at your worst? It's like learning to walk again, every step deliberate, cautious, aware of how easily you could fall. I want my name on the door, she said, running her fingers along the exposed brick wall. Same size as yours. Same font. Done. And I want final approval on all creative decisions. Done. And separate offices. I need my own space. Carter's face flickered with something. Disappointment. Maybe, or hurt, but he nodded. Whatever you need. That was the new Carter, the one who asked instead of assumed, who listened instead of steamrolled. It was unsettling sometimes, this careful version of the man who used to take up all the air in every room. I've been thinking about the rebrand, she said, pulling out her tablet. What if we told our story? Not the sanitized version, but the real one. Our divorce. Our evolution. The company that learned to do better. Led by partners who learned to see each other clearly. Carter moved closer, studying the mock-ups she'd created. His presence still affected her. The familiar scent of his cologne, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking, but now it felt like a choice to notice rather than an automatic response. It's risky, he said finally. Admitting we failed at marriage might not inspire confidence in our business partnership, or it might show that we're brave enough to face our mistakes and strong enough to fix them. The campaign she designed was bold, honest, beautiful. Photos of them working side by side, but not touching. Copy that talked about second chances, growth, the courage to start over. It was vulnerable in a way that would either revolutionize their industry or destroy their credibility. The board will never approve it, Carter said. Then we get new board. Layla. No, listen to me. She turned to face him fully. We can play it safe, rebuild the same company with better PR, and probably be successful. Or we can create something that's never been done before. A business built on radical honesty about what it means to fail and grow and try again. The passion in her voice, the fire in her eyes. This was the woman he'd fallen in love with in Austin. The one he'd spent 5 years trying to dim because her light made him feel small. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The question surprised her. The old Carter would have already been listing reasons why her idea wouldn't work, explaining why his approach was better. This Carter was asking how to support her vision. "Trust," she said simply, "and space to be brilliant without you trying to manage or modify or improve what I create. You've got it." They worked through the afternoon, spreading plans across the empty floor, debating layouts and color schemes, and 1,000 tiny decisions that would shape their shared space. It felt like dating, almost tentative and exciting and full of possibility. When the sun started setting, painting the empty office in shades of gold, they ordered pizza and sat on the floor, eating straight from the box like they were college students instead of business owners in their 30s. "Can I ask you something?" Carter said, picking pepperoni off his slice. "Shoot, why did you really come back? Not the noble reason you told Marcel, but the real one." Layla considered the question, twirling cheese around her finger. "Because I was tired of letting you live rent-free in my head. Because running away felt good in the moment, but it didn't actually solve anything. And because I'm curious about who we could be if we got it right this time. No guarantees? None. We might crash and burn. The company might fail. The partnership might implode. We might decide we're better as exes than as whatever this is. But we might also create something amazing. And I'd rather risk failure, trying than spend the rest of my life wondering what if." Carter reached for her hand, then stopped himself. They weren't there yet. Might never be there again. But the almost touch sent heat shooting up her arm anyway. What does it look like to choose love over fear, even when you've been burned before? Sometimes it looks like sitting on a concrete floor, sharing pizza with someone who broke your heart, and deciding to bet on tomorrow anyway. "I love you," he said suddenly. "Not trying to pressure you or rush anything. I needed you to know." "I know," she smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd given him since Paris. "I love you too. That was never the problem." No. The problem was that I loved you more than I loved myself." "That's not happening again." "Good," he said, and meant it. "I don't want you to love me more than you love yourself. I want you to love yourself enough to demand better from me." Outside, Atlanta sparkled to life as night fell. Inside, two people who had once been married were learning to be partners, friends, maybe something more if they could both be brave enough to try. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was a real beginning. Like this story of second chances and self-respect? Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments. What would you need to rebuild trust with someone who'd hurt you? The campaign that made her invisible went viral, but this time, she was the star of her own story. 6 months later, Layla stood at the podium of the Georgia Marketing Excellence Awards, looking out at an audience that had once whispered about her behind perfectly manicured hands. The same people who'd called her marriage a mismatch were now hanging on her every word. "Failure," she said into the microphone, "is not the opposite of success. It's the raw material success is built from." The campaign they launched, Second Draft, had become a phenomenon. Companies across the country were reaching out, asking how to rebrand after scandal, how to rebuild after betrayal, how to turn their worst moments into their strongest foundations. But it wasn't the professional success that made her heart race as she scanned the crowd. It was seeing Carter in the third row, his eyes bright with pride, his smile genuine and unguarded. And in the back, nearly hidden behind a pillar, Marcel, who'd flown in from Paris just to see her accept the award. Some stories don't end with choosing one person over another. Sometimes they end with learning to value yourself enough that everyone who loves you wants to celebrate your victories. When I left my marriage 18 months ago, she continued, I thought I was running away from failure. But what I was actually doing was running toward myself. The audience was silent, caught up in a story they thought they knew, but were hearing for the first time from her perspective. This wasn't the sanitized version Carter's PR team had crafted back when they were trying to control the narrative. This was raw truth. I spent 5 years making myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. And when that relationship ended, I had a choice. I could hide from that failure, or I could examine it, learn from it, and use it to build something better. Her eyes found Carter's again. He was watching her like she was the only person in the room, the way she'd always wanted him to look at her during their marriage. But now she didn't need his attention to feel whole. She had it because she deserved it, not because she was desperate for it. That made all the difference. The company you know today as Blaine & Associates is built on the foundation of our failures, she said. Every campaign we create, every brand we rebuild, every story we tell, it all comes from understanding that authentic success requires authentic vulnerability. The applause started slow, then built until it was thunderous. People were on their feet, and Layla felt something she'd never experienced in 5 years of marriage. She felt seen. Really, truly seen. After the ceremony, the reception buzzed with congratulations and business cards and champagne that tasted like possibility. Carter found her by the windows overlooking the city they'd both called home for so long. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Thank you, not just for the award, for everything. For coming back, for giving us another chance, for being brave enough to tell the truth up there. She studied his face, looking for signs of the man who used to take credit for her ideas, who used to diminish her accomplishments to make himself feel bigger. But all she saw was genuine admiration and something that looked like awe. We did this together, she said. No, he shook his head. I provided the failure. You provided the vision to transform it into something beautiful. Before she could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. Congratulations. Marcel appeared at her elbow, handsome as ever in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. The sight of him still sent a flutter through her chest. Not desire, exactly, but affection for what they'd shared and gratitude for what he'd taught her. You came, she said, smiling. I wouldn't miss it, though I have to admit, watching you up there. He glanced at Carter, then back at her. I think I understand now why you chose to stay. Carter tensed beside her, but didn't speak. This was her conversation to have. It wasn't about choosing him over you, she told Marcel. It was about choosing to stop running from hard things. And was it worth it? The risk? She looked at Carter, really looked at him. 6 months of therapy, honest conversations, carefully rebuild trust. 6 months of learning to be partners before lovers, friends before spouses. They still slept in separate bedrooms, still moved carefully around each other like dancers learning new choreography. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt like an equal in her own relationship. Ask me in another 6 months, she said. Marcel laughed, the sound rich and warm. Fair enough. He kissed her cheek, nodded respectfully to Carter, and melted back into the crowd. Does it bother you? Carter asked. That he's still in love with you? Does it bother you that I might always care about him? Carter considered this seriously, the way he considered everything now, with thought and care instead of ego and assumption. No, he said finally. He helped you remember your worth when I was too stupid to see it. I'll always be grateful to him for that. The answer surprised her with its maturity. The old Carter would have been threatened, possessive, demanding she choose sides. This Carter understood that the heart was big enough for different kinds of love, different kinds of gratitude. Dance with me? He asked, gesturing toward the small dance floor where couples swayed to jazz standards. She took his offered hand, let him pull her close but not too close, let herself feel the solid warmth of him without losing herself in it. They moved together like they were learning the steps to a song they'd never heard before. Slowly, carefully, with plenty of space for both of them to breathe. It felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for. How do you measure success in love? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. She started invisible and became unforgettable. Not by changing herself, but by refusing to accept anyone who couldn't see her clearly. 1 year later, Layla stood in the bathroom of their shared penthouse. Not the same one they'd lived in during their marriage, but a new space they'd chosen together, applying lipstick for their second wedding. The face looking back at her in a mirror was the same one that had whispered, "I'm not enough for 5 years of marriage." But the woman behind those eyes was completely different. She radiated confidence like warmth, moved with the assurance of someone who knew her own worth. "You ready for this?" her sister Keisha asked from the doorway. She'd flown in from Birmingham, along with their mother, both of them beaming with pride at the woman Layla had become. "I've been ready for this my whole life," Layla said, turning from the mirror. "I just had to become myself first." The ceremony was small, 30 people in the rooftop garden of the building that housed their thriving company. No ice sculptures or string quartets this time, just fairy lights, jazz music, and the people who had supported them through the hardest year of their lives. Carter waited at the makeshift altar, and when he saw her walking toward him in a simple cream dress that made her skin glow like burnished gold, his eyes filled with tears. "Hi," she said when she reached him. Yourself." The officiant, their couple's therapist, Dr. Williams, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, smiled at them both. "We're gathered here today not to witness a first marriage, but to celebrate a conscious choice." Carter and Layla have already been married. They've also been divorced. They've hurt each other, healed separately, and chosen to come back together as different people. It was true. The man standing beside her bore little resemblance to the Carter who had casually crushed her spirit at dinner parties. This Carter asked for her opinion and actually listened to the answer. This Carter celebrated her successes without trying to claim credit. This Carter had learned that loving someone meant lifting them up, not tearing them down. And she was different too. The woman who'd left that note on the kitchen counter had been running from pain. The woman standing here now was running toward love, but only on her own terms. "Layla," Dr. Williams continued, "would you like to share your vows?" She turned to face Carter fully, taking his hands in hers. "The first time we got married, I promised to love you for better or worse. I kept that promise, even when worse nearly destroyed me. A few people Today, I'm making a different promise. I promise to love you as long as you love me back. I promise to support your dreams as long as you celebrate mine. I promise to be your partner as long as we remain equals." Carter's thumbs brushed across her knuckles. "And I promise to spend every day proving that I deserve those conditions. I promise to see you clearly, to celebrate your brilliance, to never again mistake your strength for something I need to manage or control." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to love the woman you are, not some version of you that fits better into my insecurities." When they kissed, it felt like the first time and the 1,000th time all at once. Sweet and familiar, but also completely new. The reception afterward was everything their first wedding hadn't been. Relaxed, joyful, real. People told stories that included their failures alongside their successes. Toasts were made to second chances and hard-won wisdom. But the moment that mattered most came later that night, when they were alone in their bedroom. The same bedroom they'd been sharing for 3 months. Since the night, she'd finally felt safe enough to trust him with her sleep again. "Any regrets?" Carter asked, pulling her close as they swayed to music only they could hear. "About today? Never. About coming back? About giving us another chance." She looked up at him, this man who had once made her feel invisible and now saw her more clearly than anyone else ever had. "Do you want to know a secret?" she said. "Always. I didn't come back for you. I came back for me. I know, and that's why it's working this time." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. When they made love that night, it wasn't desperate or needy or weighted with the fear that it might be the last time. It was celebration. It was choice. It was two whole people deciding to share themselves with each other. "I love you," he whispered against her skin afterward, when they were tangled together in the aftermath of passion. "I love me too," she whispered back, and felt him smile against her shoulder. That was the difference. That was everything. 5 years after their first wedding, 18 months after their divorce, 1 year after their reunion, and 1 day after their second wedding, Layla woke up in her husband's arms and felt something she'd never experienced in their first marriage. Peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the deep peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong, with someone who sees all of you and chooses to stay anyway. Their company was thriving. Their relationship was solid. Their future was unwritten but full of possibility. Most importantly, she was no longer invisible. Not to him, not to the world, and most crucially, not to herself. The woman who had once documented every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being unseen, now documented something else entirely. Moments of being celebrated, appreciated, loved for exactly who she was. But the most important entry in her new journal wasn't about Carter at all. It was about herself. Day 1, I see me. Finally, completely, unapologetically. And I am magnificent. Some love stories end with happily ever after. This one ends with something better. Consciously ever after. 2 people who chose each other every single day. Not because they needed each other to be whole, but because they wanted to share their wholeness with each other. The tech mogul and his wife were no longer a mismatch. They were partners, equals, 2 people who had learned that the strongest foundation for love isn't perfection. It's the courage to grow, the humility to change, and the wisdom to see clearly. In the end, she didn't become visible because he finally saw her. She became visible because she refused to accept anything less than being truly seen. And that made all the difference. Love this story of transformation, second chances, and finding your voice? Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to settle for less than they deserved. Comment below. What would it take for you to walk away from someone who made you feel invisible? And what would it take to give them a second chance? Remember, you can't be unseen if you refuse to disappear. You are magnificent, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve space in your story.